Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you'll take on the leadership of a formerly enslaved faction. You'll be joining other factions and trying to defeat the armies of the Imperial Empire and the hordes of chaos. You'll also be building havens to provide shelter to the survivors and solving quests. Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor, is a fully cooperative 4X fantasy board game for 1 to 4 players set in the post-apocalyptic world. It takes 2 or more hours to play, for ages 14 and up, and it's published by Nemesis Games. Now, its Kickstarter campaign recently ended. It had over 3,300 backers and raised over $324,000. And in case you missed it, the late pledges are opening up right now. So let's show you how the game works, and I'll see you on the other side. This is a Kickstarter preview for late pledges opening up, so all the art and components you see here are not final. You're going to want to check the link in the description of this video to see all the final art and components. In Uprising, each player is going to play an asymmetrical faction, and every player gets to choose their own at the beginning of the game. In addition to those units, you're going to get a player board which is going to show you what those different units are, what the costs are to bring them out, the different dice they're going to have in combat, and all sorts of a player aid where it shows you all the different actions available. Now at the bottom, this is holding your havens. Over the course of the game, you're going to be placing these out. These are shelters for the survivors, and as you place these out, not only are they going to get you more resources each round, which is a chapter, but it's also going to help you gain more points as well. Your faction also has a hero, and you actually get to select which of the 2 heroes you want for that specific faction, and they both act in different ways. You also get a miniature for that specific hero and a specific feat deck, which will help you out throughout the game as well. Now this is a cooperative game, so you're working with the other factions and players in the game, and you're working to defeat both the chaos and the empire. So at the end of the game, all players must have more points than both the empire and the chaos in order to win. If even one of these is higher than any one player that's playing, then everyone loses. Now, generally speaking, the players are going to be getting points by putting out havens and having some of them on specific tiles getting you points, and you'll also be able to gain points through combat. The chaos is going to be scoring points by bringing out hordes and curses, and by defeating players' units, putting them in their graveyard, along with the Empire's garrisons, and by destroying Imperial legions. The Empire will be getting points by defeating players' units, putting them in their graveyard, along with skeletons, and destroying Chaos hordes, and by placing these garrisons out on the board. Now the game is played over 2 to 4 rounds, known as chapters, and the amount you'll play depends on the experience of the players and how difficult you want it. But each of those chapters goes through 7 different phases. Now there's a lot going on in this game, so I'm going to try to give you a high-level idea of the flow of the game, the different things that happen, and the decisions that you're making. Now at the beginning of each of those chapters, there's going to be an event that will come up, and you'll go up the different levels. It'll get more difficult as the game goes on. Now typically these events are going to have certain things that happen, and then they're usually going to place hordes and or legions depending on what level you're at. And those are essentially, you know, the ones that you're fighting against. They'll be coming out on the board. But in this case, actually a good thing happens. Wall and tower gets placed on each player's haven, which is going to help them with their defense. Now here's the main board. It's set up in different ways depending on the amount of players and the level of difficulty, and there's a lot of randomization as to which tiles go where for a lot of replayability. Now, for example, that event allows to put wall and tower on each player's starting hex where they have their haven, and when you do that, they go right on top of your haven to give it a really cool look on the table. We'll go over more of this in detail, but essentially towers and walls are defenses that allow you to roll specific dice during combat. And now in this case, we're also going to have to place a horde, and it tells you where to place them in certain spots on the board. Now they'll come out at a specific threat level. This is going to show them how many dice they're going to roll and which ones in combat, and as you do damage to them, it's going to start losing threat. But at the next event phase, the next chapter, they're actually going to gain 2 if they're still there. So you're trying to get rid of these. Plus some of them have, or all of them have, some of the immediate actions here, where you'll be like placing unused action points here, so players are using the ability to take extra actions, and even placing curses out there which do bad things. And each of those hordes will come with their own miniatures that you'll place on the map. Now as you can see, the chaos tends to start on the end of the map and work its way in, where the legions, the Imperial legions and such, work the opposite way. They work from the inside and work their way out. Now after the event phase, you go to the build phase, where each player gets 2 feat cards from their deck. They get to keep 1, put 1 on the bottom, and you start with some of these, and these are going to do different things at different stages of the game. All 3 of these actually happen right in the clash phase of the combat, which I'll show you later, but you can essentially use those up to use the abilities. Now players start with resources of salt, food, and plunder. Those are the three main resources, and you'll be able to spend them in this phase to build things. Now we already built a tower and a defense from the event, but you could spend one plunder and one plunder to build a tower and a defense where you have a haven. And you can also spend resources to bring out certain units, which you'll then place where you have a haven as well. So maybe we spent a lot of resources to bring out 3 units. Now that build phase happens simultaneously, but then in the actions phase, in turn order, players are going to be going in clockwise order and spending action points to do different things. You can see everything you do here. And you're spending those action points. Typically you start with 8, but one of those Chaos Horde took one of those away from all the players. Now one thing you could do is move, and you can do this as many times as you want, and you can do something else right after this. So you can spend this, you can spend 1 for every hex that you want to move adjacent to yourself, and then you can actually then do another action. So let's say we want to move and then we want to explore. Each of those would have cost us an action point. Now it's moving your hero. Now heroes can move into unexplored territories, but the units cannot. So we spent 1 to move, and then we'll spend 1 to explore this. Now when you explore, usually something's going to happen right away. Like here we get to gain 3 food, that's great. But then if it's empty, we place a garrison here. That's bad for us because that's the Imperial basically having some presence. So the Empire has built this garrison here. It starts at a level 1. But over the course of the game, they might build a level 2 or a level 3 like we see here. This is going to give them more dice to do bad things to you on that hex. Now we moved and did another action, so typically it'd be a next player's turn, but I'm just going to show you all the different actions that you can do here. One thing you could do is go to the market. Now this is going and grabbing an item that your hero can actually use. For example, you could spend 1 salt to get a healing potion, which will help you put one of your destroyed units there onto your haven, but you couldn't get this one because you need 1 guile, and our hero doesn't have that, so we couldn't even buy this even if we wanted to. Now, if you go here to trade, if you're on a hex with another hero, you can trade and or give different resources. So they're actually resources like plunder and food and salt, but you can also trade items as well. And when you take the trade action, you'll also always gain 1 salt. Another thing you could do is try to place a haven. Now it costs 3 plunder, and of course there can't be any enemy curses or units or havens there as well to do that. Now we just placed a garrison there, but let's just say it's a future turn. We've already destroyed the garrison. There's nothing there. We're able to place a haven like that because that's where our hero is. Now havens are huge because not only are they going to give you 2 points every chapter during the scoring phase for each one in play, it's also going to give you more resources during the production phase, which we'll go over later. Another action you could do is command. You pay a food and you choose an explored hex, and you can move your adjacent units to there. And you can never have more than 5. So maybe you'll command these to come to an adjacent spot just like this. However, if this was here and we were here, we wanted to command, theoretically, usually you can command to an adjacent hex. So we could have moved all these over here, except this is impassable terrain. Only heroes can move through those, not units. So if you wanted to get them here, you'd have to kind of move them around. And you might be able to spend an action point to try to finish a quest. And there's always a few quests that you can try to solve. So let's say we try to do the instruction of the Druids. Now here it shows you 3 different things you can go for. You can try to get 4 skulls, 1 shield, and or 1 lightning bolt. Now this quest says we need to get 2 or more of these. If we get these 2, we'll get a point for each of those. So let's say I had this little feat card here that I could use always, and I can gain 1 guile, which will allow me to get me 1 of these dice. Let's go for a white one. So we rolled 2 purple, 2 blue, and a white, and we rolled this. Well, we have at least 1 lightning bolt, and now because we got the extra die, we have a shield. So we've done at least 2 of these, and so we're gonna get a point for getting both of these, and we'll be able to solve it. So gain any 1 of your feats, shuffle your feat deck, and discard the quest. But if you fail, in this case the chaos would gain a point, which of course is bad. But gaining a feat's great because I get to look through this pile and get any one I want. After the actions phase over, you go to the Nemesis phase, and all the legions and hordes will activate for each of the activation tokens that they have on them, starting with the lowest initiative and going forward. But let's just show you this one for an example because it's a good one. So the first thing that happens is it places a curse there, and if there's already one there, they gain a point. One way for them to get points. And they're going to move the herd 1 hex. It's not going to go, it can't be further than where the capital is, but it'll move into different things depending on a, sort of a decision tree. But in this case, it's going to move right into here, which is where the haven is, with all these units, and then there's going to be some combat. Now before combat starts, we look at the terrain. We're in the marshes, so anyone doing archery or clashing, their red die becomes white, which is a downgrade. Now the way it's going to work is we're going to have an archery round, then we're going to have multiple clash rounds until one of us is defeated. Now I have 1 of each of these 3 units in there, and I have 1 archer die, so I get to roll this one. So I've rolled this die here, and they've rolled 2 of the red dice. Now, anytime that you get a skull, essentially that's going to do a damage to someone else, but we have a shield, so the shield stopped the skull. This one has a skull and a lightning bolt, and when it's an enemy, they're always going to choose the lightning bolt, which allows them to activate their god power. In this case, it allows them to place a curse in that hex. But then we're going to go into a clash round and keep doing that until one of us have all of our units basically destroyed there. So now we'd roll the dice in the clash, and if you remember, the red gets upgraded to the white die this time because we're in the marsh, so these 3 would get rolled, and now them in the clash at threat level 4, it gives 4 red dice. So let's say this is what is rolled. Well, they're always going to pick the lightning bolt, so they're going to place 2 more curses in that hex. And these 2 skulls get thwarted off by this shield, and this player decides to use the shield instead of the skull, so they're safe. And then this one will hit this. Now when you do damage to it, it'll go down by 1 threat, and now we'll do another clash. So now they're only going to roll 3 red dice, but we'll be able to roll all these. And you continue doing this until everyone is pretty much gone. If this one gets down to threat 1 and you hit it again, it is dead. And if it's destroyed, in this case, you'll get 4 points. And if you end up getting defeated, you go into their graveyard. For every faction that's here at the end of the round, the chapter, the Horde's going to get 2 points. And this includes the Empire. They can actually fight each other even though you're fighting against both those other enemy factions. Now keep in mind, there's a lot of other things that can happen in battle. There's different feat cards you may be using to add dice or do different things to dice. Once per round at the beginning, during the beginning of the chapter, I didn't tell you this, but there's 4 Druid cards. One of these get flipped over, and when you roll Lightning Bolt, you could use this god power, which in this case is, hey, gain 1 resource shown on this hex. If you didn't want to use it for this, you can use the Lightning Bolt to cancel out a shield of the enemy. And of course, if you're in a spot that you had tower and defenses, you'd be rolling those extra dice as well. Now I've shown you the Chaos Horde, I haven't shown you the Imperial Legions. Here's one, the Assassin. This comes out through different events and such. And they also have an immediate action like this one says place their target. So these work a little different. They're going to start in the capital, and they're going to target one of the players of the game. That player in this case has to flip their starting feats and place an activation token on here, which essentially is going to allow this Assassin to activate in additional time, at the end, towards the end of the round there. Now what's going to happen is they're going to target one of the havens of the player that has the least amount of units out. And now during activation, this assassin is going to be trying to move through here, get to here, and take out any units that are defending this. Now before we move on, a few more things. We showed you that there's different terrain types and they allow you to do different things. Unless there's a curse there, and only the Chaos can use the lightning bolts in those spots. We talked about Garrisons, and there's levels 1, 2, and 3, and they're going to have a certain amount of dice to fight in both Archer and the Clash sections of combat, depending on what level they're at, and you're trying to take them out just like they are an enemy as well. And there's also skeletons, and skeletons will, whether there's 1 or 2 of them, use 1 or 2 red dice in Clash. If there's a third one, they actually become a Horde. Now after all the legions and hordes activated in their initiative order, we go to the production phase, where before I showed you, you'll get as much production as the highest spot of the havens that you've placed out. Also, anywhere you have a haven, you'll be getting some resources depending on that hex. Then we go to the scoring phase. Every player is going to get 2 points for every haven they have in play. And some players might have havens on where they have an additional point. They'll get another point for that. Players can also spend 5 resources for a victory point. And you can give a point to any one faction, and that's normally done in the last chapter, but can be done on any round. Now the Chaos is going to get a point for every curse on the map, every horde on the map, and 2 points for every faction that's in their graveyard. The Empire is going to get 1 point for every hex with any garrisons, like this. They're going to get a point for every legion on the map, and they're going to get 2 points for every faction in their graveyard. Now again, you're playing a certain amount of chapters depending on the level of game you're playing, anywhere between 2 and 4, and at the end of the game, if all players have more points like you see here than both the Chaos and the Empire, everyone wins. If even one, either the Chaos or the Empire, has more points than even one of the players, then everyone loses. Well, there you have Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor, and as I showed in the overview, it's a cooperative 4x game where you'll be using your specific chosen factions to outscore the Imperial Legions and the Chaos Horde. Late pledges just opened up, so if you'd like to see all the final art and components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me in the description of this video, and it will take you directly to the late pledge page, and I'm sure that Nemesis Games would love your support.